for several sermons about the church and what the church is, right? And then the last time I was here, we talked about how do you make that commitment to being part of the church, right? And so my thoughts were this, and there's a reason this has come up at this time, is, you know, when you get down to it, we have to trust God more than we trust ourselves. Right? Because sometimes what makes sense to God doesn't make sense to us. And the reason this came up right now is I'm going to say something that I never, ever thought I would say. Okay? Because I have said for years as an educator, if I am working at a school district that does away with corporal punishment, I'm going to start looking for another job. Well, Monday I went to work, did my job, swung my paddle. Tuesday I got to work, opened up my email, there was an email from the superintendent. No, it was Wednesday because the board meetings are on Tuesday nights. Wednesday morning I got to work, I opened up my email, and there was an email telling us about what happened at the board meeting the night before. You know, this, that, the other, yada, yada, yada. And by the way, effective immediately, corporal punishment will no longer be used in the West Memphis School District. Idiots. It's the only word that came to mind. Idiots. I understand where they're coming from. Their logic makes no sense to me. Of course, the superintendent's thoughts are, this is just a lawsuit waiting to happen. I get that, brother. But let me ask you a question. How many lawsuits have there actually been of people who sue people over corporal punishment? Actually did it. What are the chances statistically? Can you hear? Okay. What are the chances statistically that I will get sued for corporal punishment? I would dare to say they're fairly small. Fairly small. Probably very small. However, what are the chances that tomorrow at my job something's going to happen where I could have used corporal punishment? 100%. Idiots. We're so worried about the 0.00257% chance that we might get sued that we ignore the 100% chance that I might could use that tomorrow. Makes no sense to me. But yet, here I am, 26 years into a 28-year career. What am I going to do? Got a great boss, good district. I don't feel like putting a resume together. You know what? If they don't like the way I'm doing my job at this point, at least I can point my finger and say, you're the dummy who threw away corporal punishment. So that's where I'm at. But it all comes down to an idea of trust. We were talking in class about the knowledge of God versus the knowledge of mankind, right? We were talking about that. And that idea. We're going to get to that here in a few minutes. But it just blows my mind that there are scriptures that say, spare the rod and spoil the child. There are scriptures that say the blueness of the womb drives the, I can't remember the exact wording of it, far away from your child. Right? And we think, oh my God, blueness of the wound, he's talking about bruising. Yeah, it sure is. But you know what? Don't we want our children to suffer those consequences in a controlled environment? Because they're going to suffer the consequences either way. And if you don't believe me, let me ask you this. How many of you sitting in this audience was told, don't touch it, it's hot? Let me ask you a question. How many of you touched it? Every one of us. I'd much rather control the damage that happens to my child during consequences than to have them suffer consequences that I have no control over. Wow. But we think we know better, when the problem is we don't trust in God. So let's talk about that. We don't trust, and what we're really talking about is we don't trust as human beings the fact that God is in control. Even though Colossians 1:16 says, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are on the earth, both visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him. Even though Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, the very start of the Bible tells us who was in control when. And in the beginning, God. Wow. 5 words in, right? 4 words in. In the beginning, God. Done. End of story. We don't trust that God is in control because we think we're so smart. We have that tendency, don't we? It's amazing to me, the older you get, the more ignorant you find out you are. But what's funny is the older you get, the smarter your kids think you are. Right? First Corinthians 1:25 that we've already talked about, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men. Y'all know what ENIAC is? ENIAC. ENIAC. ENIAC was the first computer ever created. Built in 1943. Well, started in 1943. It wasn't complete until 1946. Took up 1,800 square feet. It's probably bigger than most of our houses, right? 1,800 square feet. Had 18,000 vacuum tubes in it. Wow. Weighed approximately 18,000 pounds. The first computer. Didn't come anywhere close to the technology that exists in that little SIM card inside this phone. Mankind has come up with some pretty smart things, hasn't it? But yet, the Bible tells us that the wisest thing that man could ever create is foolishness to God. It's ignorance. The problem is we just don't trust. We don't trust that God is in control. But I think part of that comes from the fact that we don't accept who God really is. I remember my first principal when I started teaching school. His name was Bernard Davis. Jackson Wonder at that time. It was L.R. Jackson in West Memphis. Bernard Davis was 6'8". Big fella. I worked for Bernard for 2 years. Then I decided I was going to go across the bridge because they were going to pay me $7,000 more in Memphis than they did in West Memphis. So I went across the big bridge, and when I went to my school there at Sheffield Junior High School, 5 blocks behind the old Mall of Memphis, you know, the one that was shut down because people were getting kidnapped out of it. Yeah, that's where I went. I walked in to meet the principal for the first time, Mr. Tommy Holland. Yeah. He was 16. Huge. I think sometimes the reason we don't trust God is because we don't understand who He is and what He is. I mean, the Bible is very clear. Listen to Isaiah 40, verse 12, where it says, who has measured the waters. Now, which waters? All of them. Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, right? All water. He has measured the waters in the hollow of His hand. We get that? My God has measured the waters of the earth in the hollow of His hand. I get really bad dry skin. Terrible, especially back fashion. And so yesterday I was putting on some beard oil. Use beard oil? That's good stuff, man. Beard oil, and so you start, you know, it does a little dropper, you put it in, you get a little dropper, and then you put it in your hand. I can't keep a dropper full of oil in my hand. It's got, you know, there's oil all over the counter. Right? I can't keep a dropper full of oil in my hand. God measured the waters of the earth in the hollow of His. Mississippi River, that's it. Nile River, that's it. Aegean Sea, Baltic Sea, Black Sea. It's all of it. In the hollow of His hand. He meted out the heavens with the span of His hand. He measured the universe. He comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure. And He weighed the mountains on scales and the hills in a balance. I love Job. Because Job did really good. I mean, his buddies and his wife and everybody was digging at him for a long time. And Job was going, no, it's not God's fault. It's not God's fault. It's not God's fault. It's not God's fault. But eventually, even Job got to the point where he's, I'm done. And he starts coming back at God. And he starts asking God questions. And I love what God does. God comes back and asks Job. He never even answers him. He just turns around and asks him some questions. And in Job 38, verse 4, he says to Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare to me if you have understanding. In 38, verse 18, he says, have you perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare it to me if thou knowest it. He says in 38, verse 26, to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is, on the wilderness wherein there is no man. Y'all, this one kind of hits a little close. I'm going to be honest with y'all. I'm not scared of a whole lot of things. But I don't like storms. And I don't like tornadoes. You know what? Because there ain't nothing you do about it. There ain't nothing you do about it. Nothing. And then I get thinking. Not that God made those tornadoes in the night. Right? He didn't do that. He didn't create that. He didn't set their path. But the fact is, why is it Brian Vaughn can look at a piece of a television screen in his place, right, and go, there's a tornado right there? Why is that? Because he knows that if the radar shows that there's winds going in this direction and winds going in this direction right beside each other, then they're probably at some point going to start circling. And when that happens, then you see rotation. Therefore, there's one piece. Now notice one piece, right? Because once he saw wind rotation, what would he do? He'd switch over and say, well, is there a debris field there? Because if there's a debris field there, then we have another piece, right? So he switched to a different screen that would show debris fields. So he'd say, well, there's wind there, and there's a debris field there, and then he'd switch over to another one, and he'd look at that, and then he'd put all that together, and he'd say, well, okay, so if there's this, and this, I'm telling you, I don't care what the warning says. I wouldn't trust it, y'all. Stay where you at, right? God's the one who created the laws, the physical, natural, biological laws that said what it took to create that tornado. Think about that. Wow. Wow. I think back to before the flood. Why was it that Noah should have had such a hard time building the boat? Well, because God said it's going to what? Rain. Well, it rains all the time. Huh? Not before the flood. It didn't rain before the flood. You know what happened before the flood? The Bible tells you. In the evenings, fog and mist would roll in over the land. And that's how the plants got to grow. That's why it was so hard for Noah to be willing to build a boat. Because God said it's going to rain. He went, going what? I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's not only going to rain, it's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. What? We don't understand how powerful God is. But it's not just in destructiveness. Look at Job 39, verse 13, where he says to Job, I love it, he said, gavest thou, right? Did you give the goodly wings unto the peacocks? Did you do that, Job? I didn't know you did that. Right? Did you give the goodly wings unto the peacocks? Or the wings and the feathers to the ostrich? Did you do that, Job? I didn't know you did that. Right? And Job finally comes to this conclusion in 42 and verse 2, where he says, I know that thou canst do everything, God, and that no thought can be withheld from you. That's Job's conclusion. Sometimes we don't trust God. We don't trust that God is in control. We don't trust that God is all powerful. We don't trust that God knows everything. Now this harkens back to my last sermon. But I think probably most of all, we don't always trust that God cares for us. But you look at Matthew chapter 6, verses 11 through 25, where he starts there in 20 or 30, through 33, excuse me. He says in 25, "Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, for what you will eat or what you will drink, nor yet for your body, what you'll put on. Is not the life more than the meat? And is not the body more important than the raiment?" He says in verse 33, he tells us, he says, "But seek you first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Take therefore no thought for tomorrow, for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient to the day is the evil thereof." So who's going to think about tomorrow? That's God's job. That's God's job. God told us what to do with it. We get all nervous, we get all worried, we get all, what do we do, what do we do, God? He tells us in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 7 what to do. He says, "Ask, and it'll be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you." And he goes on and he talks about dads, and he says, "You understand what kind of a father whose son asks for bread and he would give him a stone?" What kind of a father would that be? He says, "Don't you believe I'm at least that good of a father? If not better? I will take care of you. I will give to you the things that you ask for." We have to trust in God's care. One of my favorite pictures, and I don't know if y'all have ever seen it or not. I've got it on this PowerPoint. But if you have ever seen it, you'll know what I'm talking about when I explain it to you. It's a picture of a lighthouse. But it's not one of those lighthouses that are on land. It's one of those lighthouses that are built out in the water, you know. And so it's built up a little bit. But then you've got the walkway around the lighthouse, and then you've got the lighthouse body that comes up. And the picture is of a giant wave coming in behind that lighthouse, and it's hitting the backside of that lighthouse, and it's coming around, and it's probably halfway up the lighthouse. But there's a person standing in the doorway on the walkway outside the lighthouse on the other side, and that water's coming around. And I look at that picture and I go, wow. And I think of this verse, Psalms 46, where it says, "God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble. Therefore will not we fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, and though the waters thereof roar, I will not be moved." Why? Because God is my refuge. So then, all we have to do is trust. Trust God. Remember when I was a kid, or when my children were kids, and they get ready to get in the pool, I'd be trying to teach them how to get in the water and swim and all that. You gotta watch those kids, right? Because you're down there in the pool and you're not paying attention, and all of a sudden they just jump, right? Why? Because they trust you 100%. They believe that mom and dad is going to be there to save you no matter what happens. We have to have that trust in God. And when we fail to, it's one of the things. We either fail to trust God in His control, in His capabilities, or in His care. And there's no reason for us to not trust in Him. Because God is capable, He is in control, and He does care. Bow with me. Father, we thank you so much for this life that you give us. Even though things happen and we don't understand why, even though things happen and it makes us question, even though things happen and it causes us to think that there's got to be something more, there's got to be something different. Even though we ourselves give ourselves those stupid questions. Be with us. And help us to understand above all things that you do care. You are in control. You are there. Help us to live this life and to do everything we can do to bring it and share it